Hi everyone, this is Lana.
And Orlando.
And we would like to welcome you to our very first episode of Double Take 2x2. So, what's this all about?
Well, Double Take 2x2 is our channel where we will discuss different topics that interest and bother us, both from Lana's and my perspective.
And sometimes we will agree on stuff, other times not. That's perfectly fine and exactly what we want to show here.
Yeah, we can have different opinions on topics, but that doesn't stop us from trying to understand each other and love each other. So let's tune in to our first topic, changing your last name with marriage.
Statistics show that in range of 70 to 95% of heterosexual marriages, women take on man's last name, either fully or adding it to their surname. Of course, statistics differ across different cultures, countries, LGBT relationships, but in a nutshell, predominantly across most cultures, heterosexual marriages still show super strong tendency in gender roles when it comes to taking on last names. And this will exactly be the focus for today.
Let's go.
Orlando and I got married last summer, and one of the big questions lots of people asked me was, are you keeping your last name next to his? Because back home in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that's perceived as the ultimate feminist thing to do. And when I would answer that I'm keeping my last name without adding his, there were quite some confused looks. One of my friends even asked me, but why? And I remember I was saying, well, it's a matter of identity, and reversed question back to him asking, how would you feel that tomorrow you become XYZ? And he immediately went, whoa, no way. And that's exactly where it hit him and where it should hit all of us. How are we, as women, expected to go with a last name change per default without even stopping to think about it if we actually truly want it? Of course, the reason behind it is patriarchy. Throughout the centuries, it was perceived that when women are entering the marriage, they're marrying off into the new family. And even in the Western cultures, there was this set of laws named coverture that specified that a married woman's identity was covered by her husband's. Basically, it meant that when marrying, women's legal rights were subsumed by her husband's. And while we have went very long way as a society with women's rights and empowerment, still nowadays with the marriage and last names traditions comes this question of the sense of identity and belonging. Just think about it. When you introduce yourself, you typically say your first name and last name. And you have repeated this across whatever number of years until you got married. And now, suddenly, you are someone new simply because your marital status has changed. For many women, this is more than fine, as they feel like it's about creating a new family. And from my perspective, this is fine as well, as long as they are making that a conscious choice and not acting on an autopilot because there is this pre-assumption that woman is the one to take the man's last name and never question any other option.
Portugal is one of the countries in the EU where it is more common for women to add their husband's last name to their surname, as there is a tradition of passing on all your surnames across generations. Because of this, most Portuguese people you meet have two or more last names, one from their mother and one from their father, and the longer ones in particular come from wealthier families. Nowadays we see a tendency to avoid long names in favor of a combination of both partners' last surnames, so in a way Portugal is in the progressive end of the spectrum. However, taking on partner's last name next to their own applied mostly to women, as men only in recent years started adding their partner's last surname to theirs. Even though I was raised by my single mother who never married and therefore never changed their name, I still had this implicit bias that only women are the ones to add on the husband's last name. I found myself again thinking about this topic during my first date with Lana, as we discussed many different topics, and among which we touched on how my full name came to be. When I explained that my name is made of all my father's names, first name and both his last names, and only the last name from my mother, this led us to discuss different traditions, and it made me more aware of the unconscious bias that I had. I realized that the last of my 3 surnames would be passed on, and that would be the one from my father. As I was raised by my mother, I actually had the feeling that I would prefer to have her last name be passed on to my children, which would be breaking up with tradition. Lana and I decided to keep our birth names, which for some was a surprise, mostly because a family with the same last name is still looked at today as a good family and a family of values. In cases where a woman decides to keep her birth name, she is often associated with less desirable traits like a strong sense of independence, lack of commitment, and feminism, almost as if she's emasculating her partner. The reverse does not really apply to men. Why isn't a man that doesn't want to change his last name showing a lack of commitment or worse, toxic masculinity? One can argue that this is just the way things were done, and that is why we don't question them. But just because things were always like this, it does not mean that we should not question their validity or try to understand the impact it has on our societies. Viewing women that decide to keep their birth name the same way men are seen will help us level the playing field between men and women and move to a less patriarchal society where men aren't reduced to their masculinity and women to losing their identity. So, last name change in marriage. Next to identity and emotional component, there is this entire legal hurdle that comes with it, where you need to go through a bunch of procedures to change all of your documents: ID, passport, driver's license, bank cards, health card, you name it. All of that takes significant effort and money. And especially for someone living abroad like us, it can be especially hard to navigate complex systems across 3 countries. And a whole new discussion on what last names to pass on to our kids, if we want to have some. This is still one we need to figure out, as we don't want to impose any of our identities to our kids, rather teaching them universal values. So let's see where we end up.
Yep. And in a nutshell, we do believe that these topics need to be brought to the public discourse to make the awareness that the choice is the most important thing. Keeping your own name, adding your partner's, taking on the partner's last name, picking out a completely new one for yourselves as a newlywed couple, or passing chosen last name or names to your children if you wish to have them. There's really no right or wrong. As long as we are discussing it with our partners openly and consciously, we are making the choice together, not because of the society and the expectations. And needless to say, it should not depend on your gender.
So yeah, this is our first episode.
Thanks a lot for being with us. Leave the feedback in the comments. We're really looking forward to hear from you on this very important topic, and stay tuned for more episodes.
As you know, on YouTube, like and subscribe.
Take care.